when we were discussing about the podcast, you mentioned was ADHD during menopause. The symptoms often get aggravated or manifested during the menopausal transition that happens. So, if you can help us understand one, what exactly is ADHD for people to really get a hold of it, and second, how can this transition be better managed?
Yes. Okay. Let me see if I can then explain, and also based on the experience with my clients as well. So, ADHD, I know ADHD is in the media now, and ADHD, and it's everywhere now. Do we know what ADHD is? Well, just to start with, ADHD, at least in this country, in the UK, it is diagnosed by psychiatrists. It is diagnosed by some specialized psychologists and some nurses as well. And they follow a criteria, basically. And based on that criteria and some symptoms, it is decided, diagnosed or not. Or it could be something else. Yeah. What I see on people with ADHD, so for example, I don't diagnose, as a nutritional therapist, I don't diagnose ADHD. I don't diagnose any other conditions either. That is not my role. This is the role of doctors and other professionals, perhaps. But so I generally get people with ADHD that they have been diagnosed. But once again, I mean, for me, it's not dealing with the diagnosis, it's not dealing with the symptoms, it's dealing with the person. And again, going back to what is causing that, and I will go a little bit more deep on that respect. But in terms of ADHD, I mean, it is developmental aspect of the brain. And also, we still don't know really well what it is, but also we've seen that dopamine and neurotransmitters have an impact in the brain and the behavior people experiencing ADHD. And one of the things that happen with ADHD is that it affects those differences in the brain or biochemistry, affects our certain parts of the brain, especially prefrontal cortex, and it affects the executive function. So, for example, what do I mean with executive function? I mean things like it affects things like planning or organizing. It affects things, and I know because I mean the spectrum is massive, and also many people might think, oh, I have problems with organizing as well. I have problems, so that's why people need to be diagnosed because depending on the extent of the symptom, yeah.
Yep.
So, but it affects things like what I said, ability to function, sorry, the ability to organize, the ability to plan. Then there is another thing that the ability to focus, the ability to multitask. I mean, is the ability to focus on different things at the same time. Because people with ADHD can be very, very focused on one thing or something that they really, really are interested on it. I mean, we're talking here about what is spicing us up. I mean, what is increasing our neurotransmitters or dopamine in this case. So other challenges that people with ADHD experience are, in addition to not to be able to focus a lot, is there is this thing of time blindness. And it's about not understanding in their head, not understanding what time is or how to manage the time, basically. And I remember in a podcast, I was listening to a podcast recently, and someone asked the question, how to manage that issue of time management. Not because, I mean, when people have these problems with time management, it's not because they don't want to. There are people that really, really are paying, making a real, real effort to be on time, to not underestimate the time that things might last, things like that. So it's not, oh, I forgot to, oh, I cannot make this on time. No, it's not about that. People are already paying a lot of attention and still it's very difficult for them to manage. But anyway, so this is what I see in clinic, and also then some coexistent aspects, like for example, weight gain, because there could be an aspect of binge eating to provide ourselves with that rush or kind of dopamine effect. So again, not two people might come with the same presentation, and it is very, very, very diverse.
Mm.
And the question was about how to manage ADHD and menopause or during menopause. And the thing is that why they are so much interrelated is because both when we go through menopause and if we have ADHD, that part of or parts of the brain that are affected in both circumstances are the same. So they are exacerbating one with the other one. And for example, estrogen has, as I mentioned, it has receptors in many tissues of our body and many organs, including the brain, including the prefrontal cortex, and that has or might have the same impact or exacerbate the symptoms that we have with ADHD. So, how to manage it and how to navigate earlier? First of all, I mean, it's about understanding. It's about understanding that, again, when we are aware of something and we know the problem is half of the solution. So, it is about understanding what is happening when we go through menopause, what is happening when we have ADHD, and work with a health practitioner. And I have to say that people with ADHD, I've seen really interesting results with working, for example, from a point of view of a nutritional point of view and working with a coach. You asked me before, what other professionals? In the case of ADHD, I think the complement, obviously the medical practice,
Mhm.
plus an ADHD coach and a nutritional therapist or nutritionist is really, really complementary and it works extremely well. We've seen a lot of good results working together. Yeah.
With the paucity of time that we have, I will just quickly ask you two more questions that our listeners have requested. So, we talked about ADHD being aggravated during menopause. Another daunting task that gets into place is weight management. And with the way we are looking at be it your own aspirational, I would say, emotions around the way you look, how you look, weight management could also further aggravate the menopausal symptoms or the different things, issues that come along with it. So, how can weight management be taken care of with the body composition, and considering that you don't overdo anything and harm your body? So, how can this navigation take place in terms of weight management?
Yeah, weight management, such an interesting topic because weight management is not just about calories in, calories out, and especially at this time, I mean, there are two important factors here. One is the menopause, where, as you said, our body composition changes, not only in menopausal women, but in general with age and for men as well, body composition changes. So it's about how to navigate that. But also, we have the other component of ADHD, where it can be more emotional or it can be more about this chemical or biochemistry imbalance in our body that can make it more challenging. And in fact, we've seen, or there are studies with not just ADHD, but with obese people, and they were imaging studies. So they've seen that with imaging with obese people or tendency to obesity, when they showed a meal rich in fat or sugar, they saw more parts of their brain lighting up. So getting more parts of the brain activated, while in people with non-obesity tendency, basically. So we see that there is a physical, chemical related change or difference in our brain already, just and that can influence our eating habits. So that is one aspect of how or taking into account emotional eating, taking into account why people tend to eat more than others, basically, or even binge eating, that it comes very apparent in some of the ADHD cases. But anyway, so what happens with management is, as I mentioned before, it's not just about calories in, calories out. We need to look into other aspects that take into consider we need to take into consideration, and we've seen in studies as well, and we see more and more that, for example, the microbiota has an impact in our metabolism and has an impact on our weight, even the different type of bacteria in our body. Some can promote more obesity than other. So again, it's not about, okay, reducing to the minimum or take counting calories. It's about what is needed for you, what is important for you, and looking at what is the composition of your gut flora. Another aspect, important aspect in weight management is thyroid, and especially during menopause, because again, the thyroid tends to, I was going to say dysregulate, no, but changes as well. We need to pay attention to the thyroid, and thyroid is key in the metabolism and is key in weight management. So it is, I would recommend to all women as well to check their thyroid and check with their doctors, is my thyroid working properly? And as I mentioned before as well, it's about, okay, understanding how our insulin is working. We are in that age, as I mentioned before, we're more prone to become insulin resistant. So we need to be looking after blood sugar regulation as well. So again, it is not about calories in, calories out. It's about looking at about how they function in our body, the status of the function, many functions in our body. And also, yes, definitely take into account that, for example, carbohydrates, because our body, the relationship of our body with the foods change as well. And we've seen in many cases that carbohydrates is key. And I hear constantly this expression of, or something similar to, oh, I look at the carbohydrates and I put weight on. I don't even need to eat them just with looking at them. So make sure, yeah, take into account that one of the things our body starts processing is not as efficient as before in processing, for example, carbohydrates. So make sure you reduce the amount of carbohydrates, and make sure, we've seen as well in studies that insulin works differently after a certain time in the evening, like for example, 7 o'clock in the evening. Make sure that you have your meal earlier, things like that. Yeah.
Nuria, you touched very slightly upon binge eating, which I'm myself guilty of. And another point, if I talk about and making it gender neutral over here, is mindful eating and not chewing the food properly. A lot of emotional eating happens during menopause as well. And again, males also do it, just not because of the menopause, but yeah, because of the emotional triggers that even they have. And one of the Bollywood actors, and like I'm a childhood fan of his, one of his talks, he mentioned that we should be, drinking our food and eating our water. So, in a manner, what he wanted to convey was that you should be chewing your food properly when you're having it. But due to a lot of reasons, one of them being the hustle bustle of our modern lifestyle, it's just that we are pouring the food in our stomach. We don't chew it. I'm myself guilty of it at times. Not probably at times, most of the times. So, but how can, women or anybody out there really find a balanced relationship with food? Either we can call it mindful eating or find that balanced approach towards things.
Yeah, that's not an easy question. It's very complex. But okay, in relation, how to find that balance. Okay, going back to what you said in terms of chewing the food, and that is key. That is key for many things. That is key to be aware more of what we are eating, to be aware more of how our body is satisfied when we eat, because sometimes we eat, keep on eating because we are not satisfied. We are not, it's not that our body is not satisfied, it's that we are not aware that our body is satisfied. Yeah. So mindful eating, chewing, that is essential to be in touch with the food, to feel more satisfied, and also to support our gut to digest better and to nourish, to absorb better the nutrients and to nourish our cells better. Sometimes also it's not, we have that in binge eating. In really, as I mentioned before, is kind of a biochemical issue in our brain. And that is perhaps because we haven't had the appropriate nutrients. And then the response to our neurotransmitters is different. So that is why it's so key to chew to the mindful eating that you mentioned. But another important thing is understanding understanding that behavior. And I touched on that in the first question. Understanding we behave in certain ways driven by an emotion. So if you imagine an iceberg, and under the water, I mean, is, or above the water, is the behavior, is the reaching for more food, for example. But we need to look at what is under that ice, under that water. And under that water, an emotion lays. And we need to, okay, what is that emotion? Is it that we feel, I don't know, frustrated, or do we feel sad? And that's why, or we feel stressed, really. And that's why we reach out, we want to reach out for that food. Yeah. And then not only we need to look at that emotion, we need to look at what is the need or unmet need that is promoting that emotion. So is it that the unmet need is that it could be we don't have enough nutrients, yeah, because we don't eat the appropriate food, or the unmet need could be that we don't have time for ourselves, and we really need some time for ourselves, and that is very, very, very relevant to the topic we are discussing, health in women in the 40s and 50s, that usually we don't have a time for ourselves. So, and it is about not dealing with that behavior, but dealing with the unmet need. Because if we deal with the unmet need, then the emotion is going to be different. And therefore, the behavior is going to be different. And chances are that wanting to reach for that food that is going to satisfy it at that moment is going to be different now. Yeah. So it's always looking a bit deeper and deeper and deeper. Why we are doing that? What emotion is causing that behavior, and what unmet need is causing that emotion that is going to trigger that behavior.
Thanks a lot, Nuria, for sharing such pearls of wisdom with our listeners out here today. And any thoughts you would like to, conclude the podcast with?
My last thought for this time is that because we've been talking about women going through the transition, hormonal transition during the 40s and 50s, and some of them might be even more challenged if they have ADHD. My final thought is about acceptance. Acceptance not in a kind of negative way, but in a positive way, because this could be, and that's why I got into working with women with menopause, because menopause, this transition can be transformational. It can be even magical. It's not all about the doom and gloom that we hear. It's not about the symptoms. It is about what the opportunities we have and we can explore going through this transition, because it's not only about the body changing, but it's about the mind changing. It's about priorities are changing. And we see that women at this age, they start businesses, they get divorced, they get married again, they go into adventures that they didn't have time for before, or they didn't even think about before. So it is a beautiful, beautiful stage in life. And I think as such, we can learn a lot about ourselves. We can learn a lot about our bodies. And it is a period in our lives that we shouldn't waste, basically. So that is my really, really final thought.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And listeners, if you have any queries or you would like to reach out to Nuria, we would be putting her contact details in the description. Please feel free to reach out to her. And at the same time, remember, it's not just about numbers on a weight scale or on your reports. It's about accepting yourself, as Nuria talked about. And the first day when you make that choice that I am going to work towards my health. So, with this, we are here for you and we are listening. Please do also feel free to vent out on our anonymous mental health forum called We Are Listening, which is a free initiative from our end to help you navigate your journey of emotional health. So, thanks out, listeners, and stay tuned until next time.